Everyone tells you the same thing. Sell your HDB, upgrade to a condo, hold it for 20 years, and you'll be a lot richer. And you know what? On paper, that's true. But here's the part I find more interesting. I've actually run the numbers for someone who is getting around $3,000 a month in rental income for her HDB. So if she sells it, she's not just giving up a property. She's giving up $3,000 of cash flow every single month. So the question isn't really, will the condo make more money? We already know that a bigger property can build more equity. So the real question is, how much more can she actually make? And is it worth giving up that $3,000 a month to get there? And there's actually one thing that could change my answer completely. It's got nothing to do with the property itself. I'll come back to it later. A viewer called Shulin reached out to me recently. She's in her mid-30s, still working, and she has a HDB flat in her own name, but she doesn't live in it. She rents it out, and she's getting roughly $3,500 a month in rental. So this really isn't a question about buying a nicer home to live in. It's an investment question. And what she wants to know is very simple. Should she sell it, take the money and put it in a private property that has the potential to build more wealth? And I actually think this is a very good question. Because if you already have an HDB that's giving you a few $1,000s of rental income every month, it's very easy to say, why would I disturb this? The property is there, the rent comes in, the loan is manageable, life is comfortable. But at the same time, if you are still in your 30s or 40s, you also have something very valuable on your side, time. And you can use your higher earning years to control a larger appreciating asset that can potentially make a very big difference 10 to 20 years later. So I don't want to tell her, definitely sell. And I also don't want to tell her, definitely keep. I want to actually run the numbers. By the way, if today's discussion has made you wonder where you stand in your own property journey, I've created a free property retirement scorecard. It takes only about 5 minutes to complete. It's not there to tell you whether you should buy a condo. In many cases, you may be doing everything right already. It's just there to help you assess whether your current property is putting you on track for the gains and retirement that you want. You'll find the link in the description below. Now let's get back to the video. So let's start with the exciting part first. Because if we are going to consider giving up perfectly good rental property, there has to be a very good reason. So I took the HDB she's holding and the roughly 1.5 million condo she's considering, and I put them both at the same growth rate, 4%. Same growth, so it's a fair fight. I'm not going to assume that the condo magically grows at 8% while the HDB stays at 2%. That's not how I want to do this. The broad property data shows roughly 4% annualized growth over the long run, depending on the segment and period that you're looking at. And the actual market obviously doesn't go up 4% every single year. Some years are much better, some years are negative, some years basically go nowhere. So when I'm using the 4% here, I'm not saying your property will definitely grow 4% every year. I'm saying let's use 4% as a long-term assumption and see what happens. And here's where it gets interesting. If she keeps the HDB, her equity grows to 1.07 million after 10 years. If she upgrades to the 1.5 million condo, her equity is around 1.4 million after 10 years. So that's roughly 340,000 more equity from the condo. And if we go further out, the gap gets even bigger, because 4% on an 800,000 property is one thing. Now 4% on a 1.5 million property is a much bigger dollar amount. So the bigger asset compounds more dollars. So if you only look at the equity chart, the answer looks pretty obvious. Upgrade, but we are only halfway through, because that extra equity doesn't come for free. So this is the part I think people don't look at carefully enough, because when you upgrade from an HDB to a much more expensive property, you're not just buying a bigger asset, you're taking on a bigger financial commitment. So let's look at the HDB first. She's getting roughly $3,500 a month in rent. So after the mortgage, conservancy charges, property tax, agent fee, she's left with around $3,000 per month in cash flow. That's real money every month. Now let's look at the condo. The condo generates roughly $4,000 in rent, but the mortgage is bigger. So there's maintenance, there's property tax, there's agency fees, and after all that, she's left with roughly $350 a month. So let's put these two numbers next to each other. So HDB, she gets about $3,000 in cash flow, and for the condo, she gets around $350 cash flow per month. So for the condo, it's about $2,600 lesser in cash flow every month. And that's not a one-off. That's every month for years. And then there's the switching costs, selling the HDB, the agent fees, legal fees, buying the condo, stamp duties, more legal fees, and altogether we are looking at roughly $66,500 just to make the switch. And that's money gone before the new property has made a single dollar of appreciation. So now we have the two numbers sitting on the screen. On one side, more future equity. On the other, less monthly cash flow. And this is where I think a lot of property discussions become too simplistic, because one person will show you the $1 million equity number and say, see, upgrade. Another person will say, look at the mortgage, don't take the risk. I think you need to look at both, because the future gain has a cost, and the cost is the cash flow you're giving up today. So now the question becomes, is that extra future wealth actually worth giving up all that monthly cash flow? And so that's the question I want to answer, because there's another problem with just looking at equity. Equity is not the whole story. Equity is what the property is worth minus the outstanding loan. But along the way, you've also had money coming in and money going out. So I want to look at the whole picture. The rental income that came in, the mortgage installment, maintenance, property tax, agent fees, the cost of switching, income tax, everything that came in, everything that went out. And then we can ask, at the end of 5, 10, 15 or 20 years, which decision leaves her with more wealth? And this is where I found something quite interesting, because there are actually two very different scenarios. Okay, let's say she keeps a HDB, and every month that $3,000 or so of rental cash flow comes in. She doesn't spend it. She puts it aside. She saves it. Now compare that with the condo. Remember, the condo is already forcing her to put much more of her monthly income towards the property. So let's see what happens. At 5 years, if she keeps the HDB and saves the rental income, her total wealth is about $834,000. If she upgrades to the condo, it's about $826,000. So after 5 years, basically break even. This is important because if someone tells you, upgrade and you'll definitely be richer, well, that's not necessarily true in the short term. You've just paid the switching costs, you've taken on the bigger mortgage, you haven't had enough time for the bigger asset to really work hard and compound. Now let's go to 10 years. The HDB scenario is about 1.21 million. The condo is about 1.3 million. Now the condo is ahead by roughly 92,000. At 15 years, the gap grows to 241,000, and at 20 years, HDB about 2.13 million. The condo is about 2.58 million. So that's roughly 445,000 more for the condo. So if she's disciplined enough to save all that rental income herself, the condo still comes out ahead over the long term. But notice something, it's not an extra $1 million. The difference is around $445,000 in this scenario, and that's because the HDB rental income has also been working for her. Now let's change just one thing. What if she doesn't save the rental income? What if she uses it? Which honestly is probably what most people would do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you have $3,000 coming into your bank account every month, of course it feels like income. You'll use it for the family, you pay bills, you help your children, you go on holiday, you spend a little more comfortably, and that's what cash flow is for. So let's assume she does exactly that. She spends the rental income. Now the picture changes quite dramatically. After 20 years, the HDB gives her about 1.4 million in total wealth. The condo gives her around 2.5 million. And that's roughly 1.09 million more. And now you may say, so the condo really does make her $1 million more. But not because the condo grew faster. Remember, we gave both properties the same 4% growth rate. So what's actually happening? I think this is the most interesting part of the whole calculation. The condo is effectively forcing her to save, and that's the advantage. Not some magical appreciation rate, and not because condos automatically outperform HDBs every single year. The HDB gives her around $3,000 of usable cash flow every month. She can spend it. The condo gives her only $350. The rest is going towards the much larger mortgage. And that mortgage is slowly converting her income into equity. So the thing that looks like the disadvantage of the condo, which is the big monthly commitment, is actually part of what helps her build more wealth. And this is something I think people don't always understand. Sometimes the reason we don't build wealth isn't because we don't earn enough. It's because we have too much flexibility to spend what we earn. The HDB gives her that flexibility. The condo takes some of it away. So in this particular scenario, the condo becomes a kind of forced saving mechanism. And that's why the difference can become so large over 20 years. And this is actually what I would seriously consider if I were in her position. You don't necessarily have to choose between spend everything or upgrade and lock yourself into a much bigger mortgage. There's a third option. Keep the HDB. Suppose she spends $2,000 a month of the rental cash flow, so she still gets to enjoy the money. She can still help with the family expenses. She still has some breathing room. But instead of spending the entire $3,000, she takes the remaining $1,000 and invests it every month. Now she's creating her own forced savings. And if that $1,000 is invested consistently over 20 years in, for example, the S&P 500, which has an assumed long-term return of around 8% per year, it could grow to roughly $600,000. And to add that to the HDB wealth, she's getting close to $2 million. Yes, it's still below the $2.5 million that the condo can give her, but look what she didn't have to do. She didn't have to pay the $66,000 switching costs. She didn't need to take on a bigger mortgage. She could still keep her HDB. She could still enjoy the $2,000 of rental cash flow. And so this is quite a different proposition. So why doesn't everyone just do that? Keep the HDB, spend $2,000, invest $1,000. Sounds easy, but the catch is you actually have to do it every month for 20 years. You can't do it for 6 months and then say, actually I need $1,000 this month and next month and the month after. And so this is where the difference lies. The condo forces the discipline. You don't have a choice. The mortgage is there. The bank wants its money. But if you keep the HDB and create your own investment plan, you have to provide the discipline yourself. And that's a very different thing. So I've been doing strength training recently, and in my last workout, I got a bit greedy. I put on too much weight on both sides, and my back started hurting. And I thought, this is actually quite similar to property. The whole point of strength training is to get stronger, build some muscle, but not to put so much weight that I'm going to hurt my back. So the next workout, I just need to take some weight off. Still training the same muscles, but this time not straining my back. And I think property is the same. We want to build more wealth, yes, but not by putting so much financial weight on ourselves that the next 10 to 20 years become miserable. Because with the dumbbells, I can just take some weight off. But with property, you can't just call the bank and say, actually this month, can I pay just a little bit lesser? You can't easily reduce the weight once you've taken it on. So before you ask, how much cash can this property make me? Maybe you should also ask, how much financial weight can I comfortably carry for the next 10 to 20 years? And this is very important in this case, because the purpose isn't just to have a bigger number on a spreadsheet. It's to build wealth without making your life miserable along the way. Now that we've looked at everything, I think the answer is actually not so straightforward. If she's someone who is very disciplined, she keeps the HDB, collects the rental income, and actually saves or invests a large portion of it, then the HDB is not a bad asset to hold on to. In fact, over the first 5 years, the difference can be almost nothing. And even at 10 years, the difference is not enormous compared with the amount of financial commitment she's taking on. But if she knows herself and knows that if I have $3,000 coming into my account every month, I'm probably going to spend it, then the condo becomes much more interesting because the larger mortgage effectively forces her to save. And if her main objective is to maximize the amount of wealth she can build over the next 10 or 20 years, and she has the income and holding power to comfortably carry the property, then I can understand why upgrading makes more sense. But I wouldn't make that decision based purely on the condo is 1.5 million and the HDB is 800,000. I'll look at the whole picture, the growth, the equity, the monthly cash flow, the switching costs, the rental income, the holding period, and most importantly, her ability to actually carry the financial weight. Because if you can't hold a property comfortably for long enough, the theoretical return doesn't matter. So if I were sitting across the table from her, I wouldn't simply ask, do you want to sell your HDB? I'll ask her something else. Are you willing to give up roughly $2,600 of monthly cash for the next 10 to 20 years in exchange for the possibility of building substantially more wealth? And then, can you comfortably carry that weight? If the answer is yes, then we can start looking at which private property actually gives her the best chance of achieving that objective. Because I wouldn't want to ask someone to upgrade just for the sake of upgrading. The property has to justify the move. And if the answer is no, then keeping the HDB and deliberately investing part of the rental income may actually be the better strategy. Because there's no point in becoming rich on paper while making yourself miserable in real life. And this is exactly why I don't like giving people a blanket answer of HDB owners should upgrade. Some should, some shouldn't. The answer depends on the numbers and the person. And if you are sitting on an HDB that's giving you good rental income and you're wondering whether you should keep it or sell it and move into a condo, I've put a link below where you can get me to run your numbers for you for your situation. Because your HDB may be funding your retirement, or it may be the thing that is holding back your retirement. And the only way to find out is to run the numbers.